the Google, you can look up to the preacher preaching the word, and it is one of the most effective books that we can see in the Bible, in the Old Testament. And when we look into it, we'll be confused if you don't know the historical setting of this book. So I'll just like to give a quick gist on the book of Haggai. We can see that God has brought Israel out of the slavery from Egypt in the Exodus in the 1445 BC. When we read in the book of Exodus, we can see how God has bring out the Israelites from the clutches of Egyptian. So we can see that. And God told his people that if they chose to break their covenant with him, he would again allow other nations to take into slavery. When we read the book of Jeremiah, chapter 2, verses 14 to 25, you can see how God has warned Israel that if you go away from the presence of God, God will surely punish them. That's what we see in the book of Jeremiah, and as well as in other books as well. In spite of God's repeated warning from the mouths of his prophets, Israel and Judah chose to reject their Lord and instead chose to participate in the worship of foreign gods. In addition to committing abominable practices with accompanied idolatry. We can see that in the book of 2 Kings chapter 17 verses 7 to 8 and Jeremiah chapter 2 verses 9 to 13. God has spoken through the prophets what to do, what not to do, but still Israelites tend to lose their focus. They tend to go back to their old self. They tend to worship idol practices, and they tend to practice the things that they were not supposed to do. So God has been speaking to the Israelites through the prophets to warn them, to show them the right direction, to bring them back. That's what we can see in the book of the Kings, as well as the prophets. Through the prophets, we can see all these things. But despite of all that, Israel tend to lose its step. Just as a small kid, I think many of you as a family, you have kids at home, and you know how they are. You'll tell them not to do that, not to put their hand on the candle, but still they will go and put their finger on the candle until they feel the burn in the finger. So that's what God's keep on repeating, what to do, what not to do to his people, but still Israelites tend to fall back. And just as God has warned them in the same way, God brought the Assyrians and Babylonians to issue the punishment upon the wayward Israelites. We can see the Assyrians as well as Babylonians coming and attacking Israelites and taking them with them. So we can all see that how God has punished the people of Israelites. And in 1722 BC, the Assyrians deported 10 northern tribes and scattered them all over the empire. Several centuries later, in 605 to 586 BC, God used the Babylonians to sack and nearly depopulated Jerusalem. Because Judah persisted in her unfaithfulness to the covenant, God punishes his people with 70 years of captivity. In Jeremiah spoke about 70 years of captivity in chapter 25, verse 11, from which they returned to Jerusalem as reported by Israel and Nehemiah. Just as God has warned them in the same way, the Assyrians, the Babylonians, they came, they took them away from their own land, and they made them as a slave. It was on for 70 years, just as Jeremiah prophesied in his book. So at that time, Cyrus the Persian overthrew Babylon in 539 BC, and the book of Ezra begins with the decree of Cyrus 1 year later for the Jew to return to Jerusalem. That is in 538 BC, and it's Chronicles. The establishment of Judah's national calendar of feasts and sacrifices, including the rebuilding of the second temple, began in 536 BC and completed in 516 BC. As there has been 3 waves of deportation from Israel to Babylon, there are 3 waves of deportation. As we look into the Bible, we can see how the Babylon deported the Israelites. It was not at once, but 3 times. For 3 times, Israelites has been taken from their land to Babylon. That we can see in 605 BC, 597 BC, and 586 BC. It was the 3 times that Israel has been taken out from their land, homeland, and deported into Babylon. You can see that. So there was actually 3 return to Jerusalem over a 9 decades. In 9 decades, we can see returning of the Israelites, just as they were deported 3 times. They were also returned. We can see them returning for 3 times returns. And this was the first remnant was led by Zerubbabel in 538 BC, and he was followed by Israel, who led the second return in 458 BC. Nehemiah did likewise. Right? The first one was led by Zerubbabel, the second one was Israel, and the third we can see Nehemiah, who rebuilt the walls of Jerusalem. If you read the chapter of Nehemiah, we can see how Nehemiah led the Israelites, and he has requested the king, and the king also gifted him. So many things we can see in the book of Nehemiah if you go through. So in the same way, just as they were deported 3 times, the return was also 3 times, we can see that. The Israelites returned from Babylon under the civil leadership of Zerubbabel and the spiritual guidance of Joshua the high priest. Now when we talk about Haggai, we can see the first return. About 50,000 Jews returned. In 536 BC, they began to rebuild the temple. In 536 BC, they began to rebuild the temple, but opposition from neighbors and the indifference by the Jews caused the work to be abandoned. 16 years later, Haggai and Zechariah were commissioned by the Lord to stir up the people, not only to rebuild the temple, but also to reorder their spiritual priorities. When we look into the book of Haggai, we can see that it was God not only told Haggai about rebuilding the temple, but also check themselves, like how is their spiritual life, how are their priorities in their lives. We can see this in the book of Haggai itself. Haggai's crucial message is mentioned in Israel 5:1-2. These are all connected. If you can go back to the history, we can see Israel and Haggai, just go back to back, and the story it will connect. So, and it was the Lord's intention to the Jews to rebuild the temple. So God sent Haggai to the Jew with a simple message. The message was build the temple. It was just a simple message that God has given to Haggai to tell to the people. Haggai is just to build the temple. That's what we can see the message in the book of Haggai. When they came back from Babylon, we can see, if you read, we can see the selfish nature of the Israelites. And what was that? When they finally reached their land, they started the temple, but left it half constructed and was busy building their own homes. As we read the verses, we can see that they started, but they left it halfway. And they were busy building their own homes. They were busy looking after their own self. They were not caring for the Lord's temple. In verse 1 and 2, we can see them saying, the time has not yet come for the Lord's house to be built. Right? The time has not come. They just assume that the time has not come for us to build the Lord's temple. That's what Israelites were assuming themselves. Just as we can see them assuming in the times of Egypt, how they were, like God has been faithful to them. God has taken them out from the land of Egypt, but still they're complaining. Lots of complaints on the way. But not knowing how God has blessed them. In the same way, even now we can see they are assuming that the time has not come for us to build the temple of the Lord. That's what they were assuming. They were selfish and were building their own homes before the Lord's house. Their attitude is very much clear in 1 verse 9 in B part. While the Lord's house lay in ruin, everyone was concerned with their own home. This was the attitude of the people. They forgot what God has done for them and how He has delivered them. They only thought for their own benefit, placing God in the second place. They were just building their own house, they were just building their own self, they were just concerned with their own well-being, not knowing, not giving God as the first priorities. That's how selfish the Israelites were. We can see that in these verses as we read. But as we can see how they responded when Haggai came to them and when Haggai spoke to them regarding this. And also we can see that the Lord challenged the people to consider their ways. 1 verse 5, you can see things has not been going well for them. They should have been building the temple. We can also see that because they have not built their homes before the Lord's house, they prospered little. Whatever they do, it was not enough for them, right? Whatever they put into this one, but it was never enough for them. What happened? We can all see in the following verses. They prosper little. What little they have, the Lord blew it away. Now, if they get 10 rupees, then 20 rupees is gone. If they sow the seed, then there is no harvest. Nothing as such. It was all gone in vain. And at that time, we can see things has not been going well for them. They should have been building the house of the Lord. We can also see them because they have put buildings their home before the Lord's house. They prospered little. What little they have, the Lord blew it away. The Lord even called for a drought in judgment upon them. They worked hard, but what had it earned them? Their crops were unsuccessful. Their money disappeared as soon as they earned it. Why? Haggai asked. All this happened because they had mistaken their priorities. They needed to put God first. They were all questioning. The Israelites were questioning why all these things are happening, why we are not blessed, why it is very little for us. At that time, Haggai stepped up and he spoke to them regarding this. People responded to Haggai immediately, right? People responded. As soon as Haggai said what they are doing is wrong, what they should be doing is putting God in as the first priority instead of building their own homes. At that moment, people responded to Haggai immediately. Prophets before him, such as Amos, Isaiah, Jeremiah, have spoken for decades without seeing such a harmful reaction. But at that moment, Haggai's message spanned a mere of 4 months, but he accomplished everything he set out to do. In 4 years, the temple was completed. In the first chapter, we can see that whatever was happening to the people was God's way of retaliating to their attitude. But when we look in the next chapter, we can see God declaring that He will bless them because they have put God first. There are only 2 chapters, and in these 2 chapters, we can see the first chapter as God retaliating about what they have done. But in the second chapter, as we look, we can see how God is telling to them, and God is praising them. And God said that He will bless the people of Israel because they listen to the word of God. Again, I will just to illustrate this point, I would just like to say, just from the life of a farmer. A farmer has a small piece of land. The farmer was very focused on building a beautiful house for his family and spent all his time and resources on it. He neglected his fields, thinking he would tend to them later. As a result, his crop failed and his family struggled to have enough food. One day, a wise elder visited the farmer and pointed out that his priorities were misplaced. The elder advised him to first take care of his field, as they were the source of his sustenance. The farmer heeded the advice of the wise man, and he focused on his field. And soon we can see it bearing fruit, and it sustained the family. This is the story of Haggai speaking to the people of Israelites, and people of Israelites heeding the advice of Haggai, and we can see how God blessed them after that. We can see in the same way Haggai is also speaking to us. So what can we take from this story today? We can we have to prioritize God. Just as the Israelites were called to prioritize rebuilding the temple, we are reminded to put God first in our lives. This means dedicating time, resources, and inner energy to our spiritual growth and service to God rather than focusing solely on personal ambition and material gain. Many times we tend to get lost in all the material things that we have in our works without prioritizing God. But what this Haggai, from the book of Haggai, what we are learning is we have to prioritize God despite of all these things. The second is evaluating our priorities. Haggai's message encourages us to reflect on our priorities. In the same way, are we investing more in our own comfort and success than in our relationship with God and His work? This self-examination can help us realign our lives to ensure that God is at our center. The third thing is we have to understand the consequences. The Israelites faced hardship because they neglected God's house. Similarly, we might experience difficulties when we ignore our spiritual responsibilities. Recognizing this can help us understand that some challenges may be called to refocus on our faith. The fourth is experience God's blessing. When the Israelites obeyed Haggai's message, they experienced God's blessing. This principle applies to us today. When we put God first, we can trust that He will provide for our needs and bless us in a ways that we might not expect. I think many of us, we have felt the blessings of God in our lives as well. So in the same way, we have to think back on what is happening in our lives. And also the number fifth is the immediate action. The Israelites immediately respond to Haggai's message is a powerful example for us. Just as we can read from the book of Haggai, in the same way, it's a very powerful message for each and every one of us to respond to God's call. Instead of delaying our commitment to God, we should act promptly to prioritize Him in our daily lives. Even in our daily lives, we should always give God the first priority. We should always retrospect what happened and how is our life going, so that we can immediately respond to the call of God. In summary, Haggai's message is a time